One popular thing for players with some clout to do to get easy views on Twitch and YouTube is to make a tier list or a matchup list for the character they main. There aren't a lot of Ridley mains on Twitter doing any lists for him. The only one I've seen so far is by Locus, and in an effort to stimulate some discussion, I'll put in my own 2 cents. There's clearly a vacuum of content for Ridley here, so I will help. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate does not have an official tier list, and most lists right now are speculation. What you're seeing here is a tier list comprised of the average placings of other top player tier lists. Reddit user Agusum has helpfully gone through the effort of compiling lists from Esam, Samsora, MKLeo, and Leffen, and averaging out the placings of every character in each of those lists to give us this. You'll notice that Ridley has been placed at the very bottom of B tier. Higher than I was expecting, but lower than I agree with, personally. I'm not going to spend this video going over every single matchup. That would be silly and make the video over an hour long, and some criticisms I got with my recent guides were over their length. So instead, I'm only going to talk about the matchups that I have enough personal experience with to make informed statements about them, which gives us these. You'll notice that most of them are top tier characters. I also won't assign numbers to the matchups, like I'm not going to say that Ridley wins X matchup 60-40 or whatever to that effect, because I'm not confident I can make those calls with total certainty. So instead, I'm going to list them with far more general, uninteresting metrics, whether Ridley does well in the matchup or he does poorly. If you're interested, there's also a separate video going up alongside this one on some more general movement and decision-making options that are available to Ridley that I've integrated into my play over the past few months. Before I begin, just a real quick side note, because I'm worried there might be some confusion about this. Matchup charts are supposed to assume that both characters are being played by players of equal skill. I think Ridley does well against Snake, for example, but that is in no way meant to imply that I can beat MVD in a set. Starting off this list is some good news. I'm very confident in this matchup, and I think Ridley does especially well in it, at least compared to the other top tier threats on this list. Ask yourself some questions. What makes Lucina so good? What is her main appeal over Marth? As of this writing, it's her disjoint, decent frame data, and intense kill strength. Marth's kill strength is technically stronger, but only if you get the correct spacing. Lucina gives you moderately less strength, but in exchange you don't have to overly concern yourself with spacing, and a forward smash at the hilts will kill your opponent just as hard as a tippers would, which is not the same with Marth. The thing is though, Ridley also has overbearing kill strength, and he outranges Lucina. Those are the 2 factors that make Lucina so attractive, and Ridley is better than her at both of them. Lucina opts to lose the tipper in exchange for equal strength throughout her blade, meaning she isn't as focused on spacing as Marth is, but the range that Ridley wants to play in is often just outside her own, meaning he'll have an easier time focusing on the mid-range game without losing any of his own strength. As a Ridley, I'm actually far more cautious of a Marth than a Lucina for this very reason. I'm not going to suggest that Ridley is a better character than Lucina, heaven forbid. Ridley has a ton of faults that Lucina doesn't have, including his vulnerability to getting juggled and his fragile recovery, at least compared to hers. But it's not unheard of for a mid-tier character to have a positive matchup against the top tier, and personally, I think this is exactly the scenario these 2 are in. If you have a Lucina in your region that you're struggling with, I will gladly recommend that you pick up Ridley as a pocket against her. Wolf is a character of extremes. You're both either all in or you're both playing the camping game, and Ridley can't really win in either scenario. Wolf's laser is too fast and too good at stuffing many of Ridley's options, and because of Ridley's big body, it's not easy to try and maneuver around them to close the gap. Ridley can try and counter with Plasma Breath, but Wolf can start firing his second laser in the time it takes Ridley to shoot 1 fireball, and Wolf has a reflector. Ridley has an okay time boxing with Wolf, but it's still not the best. Ridley can make the bigger, stronger hits, but Wolf can make longer strings that will ultimately do more damage than Ridley can do to him. Ridley's primary advantages against him are his superior range, which will be a common theme for most of his matchups, and the fact that Wolf is one of the few characters in the game that has a worse recovery than him. A single fireball can be enough to knock Wolf fatally off course with the ledge, but the challenge will be getting him there in the first place. Playing against Inkling requires a different mindset than against most other characters, although I'm sure that's true for a lot of Inkling's matchups. Inkling has an extraordinary combo game against Ridley, and Ridley is one of the few characters that Inkling can get the up throw up air true combo at kill percents. Ridley's aerial wall of neutral airs and forward airs will work against Inkling just as well as any other character, but as soon as Inkling gets in, they don't really get out until they decide they want out. As Ridley, your objective when fighting against Inkling is to outbox them and force them to approach you, but that's a tall order considering the amount of options Inkling has available in their kit at all times. Splat Bomb nullifies all of your walling options, forcing you to pick up and move, which can be a fatal option against a character as quick as them. As with most characters you'll fight against, Inkling can't really contest your melee range, but with speed and long range options like theirs, they don't need to. Still, that's an awfully pessimistic doom and gloom outlook on the matchup. The truth is, Inkling will very rarely get a kill with Splat Bomb on you, and they're going to need to approach you eventually. Inkling universally has a tough time getting the kill, whereas Ridley does not. It's not impossible to make the matchup as annoying for them as it is for you, but it's gonna take a lot of work. The number 1 in my region mains Fox, and let me tell you, this matchup is impossible. Fox's strength has always been in getting into his opponent's face and keeping them aloft with a string of oppressive tilts and aerials. Ridley is already susceptible to being juggled, and as soon as Fox hits you once, that's it. You might as well just start thinking about game 2. A good Fox will use you as their giant purple funny looking punching bag. Ridley's range, the primary thing keeping him in most fights, is pretty worthless against a character with frame data as oppressive as Fox's. What's the use of all that range if you can't get the time to use it? You can't try to fight Fox on his own terms, which is to say, playing the game of who can press more buttons, because Ridley doesn't stand a chance. Because of Ridley's weight and his size, he remains in kill combo percents longer than most other characters, and you're vulnerable to the nair into jab lock or up smash as late as 130%. Fighting Fox is hell. The only positive thing I can say about this matchup is that it's fairly easy for Ridley to capitalize on Fox's recovery. If Fox goes high, Ridley doesn't have a problem meeting him on his descent with nair or something, and if Fox goes low, it's strangely easy, easier than most others in the cast, to punish his recovery with a down smash or a plasma breath. But these little boons in Ridley's favor are disastrously too little too late compared to the rest of the entire match. Ridley vs Ike is a very thin ice matchup that has the potential to swing wildly with every other hit. Yes, Ridley is a big target, and an Ike neutral air is going to hurt you as much as it hurts the rest of the cast, but your own neutral air is pretty scary too. Ike must use his nair while descending in order to get the most out of it, while you can use yours in any situation and get consistent results. What this means is, Ridley can use his nair out of shield and expect consistent follow-ups, but Ike cannot. If you see an Ike jumping around pensively, odds are pretty good he's looking for an opening to use nair, and if you can get him to use it on your shield, you can punish accordingly 100% of the time. Of course, there's more to this matchup than just our neutral airs. Ike is one of the few characters that can challenge Ridley's range, and both characters have similar follow-ups out of things like down throw and down tilt. Both characters are beefy heavy boys that aren't lacking in kill strength. Ike will have an easier time getting follow-ups out of his attacks until higher percentages, while Ridley has an easier time pressuring Ike's recovery. Like Wolf, all it takes is 1 or 2 fireballs and Ike will be dead in the air. You can bait Ike into recovering high and only fire a handful of fireballs, and that'll leave him wide open for an up smash. In my experience, both Ridley and Ike have win conditions on each other. Ike just needs to land an air, and Ridley just needs to get Ike off stage. It's a very volatile matchup, and don't be surprised if it comes down to who can outslug the other in a slugfest. Snake is actually something of a treat for Ridley to fight. Being a heavy and without a sword, Ridley has an easy time keeping Snake aloft with juggles, and even though Snake can interrupt any string with a grenade, Ridley is heavier than he is, and you shouldn't be afraid to take those trades. Snake has a hard time trying to box Ridley due to Ridley's massive range, and unlike other characters in this list, Snake's own combo game isn't anything to write home about, compared to Inklings or Foxes, or even Ike and his nair into imagination strings. He'll have to rely mostly on grenades to try and keep Ridley out, and then capitalize once Ridley makes a mistake. But if you know how to weave between the grenades, even with a body as big as Ridley's, that shouldn't be too big of an issue for you. It comes much easier if you're a Brawl veteran like myself. That said, if Snake gets Ridley to the ledge, up smash spam is a serious threat to Ridley's well-being, and Nikita absolutely butt blasts Ridley just as hard as it does much of the rest of the cast. As a Ridley, don't be afraid to fight Snake man to man. You outrange him and you overpower him, especially with how poor Snake's movement speed is, and he's going to need to rely on his specials to get him out of most jams against you. Ridley wins this matchup on stage, but if you're knocked off stage, getting back is going to be some real high-stakes speed chess on your part. Young Link is a bit of a struggle. Naturally, when it comes to fighting in close quarters, Ridley is going to outspace Young Link's butter knife by a country mile, and Ridley's kill options are generally a bit safer than Young Link's. But that's when you're fighting face to face, and as anyone that plays as young Link, or has fought young Link, or has had even a passing interest in him will tell you, that isn't how young Link operates. Young Link is going to run across the stage, pelt you with a barrage of projectiles, and as soon as one lands, he's going to capitalize on you with your big heavy body hard. Ridley's only answer to young Link's hit and run onslaught is to try and parry everything, or at least shield it all, and maybe try and disrupt young Link with some plasma breath, but it's an extremely uphill battle for our dragon. Still, it's not like Ridley's the only character that has this problem with young Link. Even top tier characters like Peach are going to have to muscle their way forward, so it's not unreasonable that an ambiguously mid-tier character like Ridley is going to have to walk the same path. Dealing with the constant barrage of junk is a real struggle, but like every dark challenge, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. If you can trudge your way through young Link's wall and force him to engage at a range where he can't comfortably use his projectiles, the momentum will be decidedly in your favor. At first, I was hesitant to give this matchup a rating on whether Ridley does well in it or not, because although you are decidedly playing young Link's game at the word go, the swing is when Ridley manages to break through the wall and force young Link to engage, and that's not a position young Link is going to do well in against someone with range like Ridley's. But it's because the match starts with a conditional that Ridley needs to meet first that I'm going to say that Ridley doesn't do well in it. The match essentially doesn't begin with both characters in neutral, and because of that I can't in good conscience suggest that it's anything but an uphill battle for him. Like Ike, fighting against Cloud is a game of hot and cold that can swing pretty brutally in either direction with just a hit or two, and also like Ike, Cloud has the range to contest Ridley. There isn't a position that Ridley can fight Cloud at melee range without Cloud also having the chance to fight him back, except maybe with down tilt. Cloud's movement and skill set is like a cross between Lucina's and Ike's, retaining the strengths between them. He's been nerfed quite a bit coming from Smash 4, especially with respect to all of his limit options, but he's still got the speed to weave into Ridley's bubble, and even if you manage to keep him out, he has the range to play the mid-range game against you. Ridley will have an easier time bullying Cloud off stage, generally speaking, than Cloud will to him, thanks to things like Plasma Breath being a nightmare to try and weave around, and Climb Hazard being a bit testy to deal with against things like forward tilt or down smash. Cloud also doesn't have many options to contest Wing Blitz because of the invincibility on his wings, but be wary of going straight to the ledge if Cloud has limit because he can just as easily use Cross Slash to intercept you from the side. The bottom line for this matchup is that you're both going to want to play the spacing game, and it's going to come down to who can find that magic overlap where they can safely put themselves into the offensive first. Your battles on stage are going to be slugfests that hinge on capitalizing on the opening first, and then extending that advantage as long as you can. Ridley can make Cloud's life a living hell off stage, but because Cloud is the more maneuverable of the two on stage, I'm inclined to give this one to him. I said in my previous video that Ridley has a difficult time against zoners, and Rob in his zoning game isn't an exception, but Rob plays a bit differently from other characters of his archetype. Rob is more of a half and half zoner brawler type character that easily flexes between playing long range and short range at the drop of a hat, and while playing long range is frustrating for Ridley to deal with, he's actually very okay with challenging Rob when the robot wants to go in. This matchup plays similarly to Young Link's in that Ridley, unfortunately, doesn't have the same tools to try and contest Rob from a distance, so he has to wait for Rob to get tired of throwing stuff and come to him. Fortunately for Ridley, Rob can't throw out more than one gyro and he can't spam lasers, unlike Young Link, who can throw whatever he wants almost as often as he wants. Because Rob doesn't have a weapon to fight Ridley with, it's not difficult to fight him in the spacing game just like any other brawler type character. Rob's most effective range is just at the edge of Ridley's, so if you can keep ahead of your opponent and recognize when they're trying to space against you, you can punish accordingly. You're both heavy so you can both get long strings on each other, but aside from having to deal with the common projectile now and again, Ridley is okay with waiting. This matchup is interesting. King Dede has a weapon, but he doesn't move like other characters in this list that have weapons. He has range, but it feels noticeably stubbier than Lucina's, Ike's, or Cloud's. He has the weight to outlast Ridley, and he has the strength to kill earlier than most characters in the cast can. King Dede is a super heavyweight, and he has the strengths of a sword user, but the best way I can describe it is that his super heavyweight half has the weaknesses of a sword user, and his sword user half has the weaknesses of a super heavyweight, if that makes any sense at all. This is an unusual thing for me to suggest, but Plasma Breath works quite well in this matchup. Most King Dedes like to use Gordo Toss quite a bit, and if you can bait it out, which isn't difficult given how often they like to use it, Plasma Breath will not only beat Gordo, but King Dedede will take the damage from the Gordo, plus the follow-up fireballs, plus a dash attack if you're close enough. He also can't try to inhale reflect them because it'll only work for the first fireball. All the others will meet their mark effectively. It's scary to fight against King Dedede because his weight makes him so much harder to kill, and a misstep in your spacing means you get hit harder than most other characters can hit you in the space of a move or two. However, King Dedede shares Ridley's weaknesses. As Ridley, your goal in this matchup is less to outspace him, and more to outpunish him on his mistakes than he can do to yours. He's fatter than you are, but you're quicker than he is, and your kill strength is still enviable. Stay on your toes, don't be afraid to attack, and you should pull ahead. Like with most matchups, especially now that we're already in the lower half of the bracket, Wii Fit Trainer struggles against Ridley thanks to his range. Wii Fit Trainer fights unarmed, and her design is already fairly janky and demanding of the player, so trying to weave around Ridley and his onslaught of long-range attacks is quite the demand for her. Still, she isn't without her threats, especially coming from Smash 4. You're a big target, and she is just as capable of capitalizing on that inherent weakness as well as most others can. You don't want to be caught getting hit by a couple of nairs in up air as Ridley. And that's not touching on deep breathing. When Wii Fit Trainer is glowing purple after a deep breath, it's honestly better to just run and go back to the spacing game than it is to try and fight her back. As buffed as she's been between games, she, by design, doesn't have much to combat Ridley and his range or his strength. Her strings are threatening once she worms her way in, sure, but it's not like she has anything special against Ridley that he needs to be overly concerned with. Her best answers to his wall of nairs and down tilts are Volleyball and Salute the Sun, but to call them so effective as to consider Wii Fit Trainer a zoner would be disingenuous. Her personal bubble is as restrictive as can be, and Ridley is very good at piercing it. Pitt is actually a huge pain for Ridley to deal with for a myriad of reasons. Pitt has a sword, and even though it's fairly stubby as far as swords go, it's still enough to contest Ridley's primary strength, which is his range. And unlike most sword users, Pitt is quite fast with it. Even if he spaces just inside Ridley's bubble, I've found that it's difficult to get an effective punish on Pitt for misspacing, and I say that in a game where it's already notoriously difficult to punish much of anything. On top of those two strengths, Pitt also has his arrows, allowing him to camp from an uncomfortable distance away from Ridley. Attempting to punish him with Plasma Breath is just as likely to get you shot in the mouth, and even if you do get off a fireball or two, Pitt has a reflector. This matchup is difficult for all the same reasons why the Wolf matchup is difficult. The biggest differences between Pitt and Wolf, at least in the context of fighting against Ridley, is that Pitt trades some combo potential for stronger, heavier hits, and he trades some frame data in exchange for having a sword. If you struggle against Wolf, you will have a marginally easier time against Pitt at best. Your own range and kill strength prevent this from being a totally unwinnable fight, but it's definitely one of your more uphill battles. It's pretty easy to write Incineroar off as a bad character because of his faults, such as his recovery and his mobility, but the truth is if you meet an Incineroar in bracket, he's deadly serious about it and you need to stay on your toes against him. Incineroar is the only character in this list that has the ability to turn Ridley's strength, which is his range, against him with revenge, and you need to respect an Incineroar's space. This is the only time this whole video that I've suggested that you do that with anyone, so I hope you appreciate just how threatening Incineroar can be if you disrespect him and his capabilities. Incineroar hits like a truck and isn't afraid to get hit, especially if it gives him the chance to get off his frame 3 counter. That said, he still needs to be able to hit you. Just because you need to respect his space doesn't mean you can't still utilize yours, and if Incineroar starts trying to approach you, you need to back up and start poking. And don't rely on punishing something with neutral air out of shield because Alolan Whip beats shields. You need to stay mobile against him. He can't run very fast and he can't outrange you, so if you don't give him the opportunity to get a hit off, you're fine, at least for the most part. It's unrealistic to assume he'll never manage to hit you the whole set. In exchange for all that bombastic strength though, is a recovery that leaves something to be desired. Ridley has multiple jumps, so don't be afraid to try and go out and pressure Incineroar's linear telegraphed recovery, but don't go so far that you'll be gambling stage control for an edge guard. Watch for him to use Alolan Whip because he's vulnerable to a forward air during the animation, and Cross Chop can be beaten with a neutral air, but that's risky for obvious reasons. This is one of the more explosive, volatile matchups Ridley needs to be concerned with. If Ridley can't rely on his range to beat his opponent, he needs to rely on his kill strength, and Incineroar straight up has him beat in that department. Matches involving these two characters are rarely close. It's usually a stomp in one direction or the other. Because of that, I'll err on the side of caution and say that Ridley does poorly. And there you have it. 13 matchups analyzed from Ridley's perspective, with 6 going in his favor and 7 going in his opponent's. Again, these are just the matchups that I personally have enough experience in to say with confidence how they might go, and what Ridley can expect and what he should do when performing in them. If you'd like to learn more about the other 56 matchups, not counting the Ditto, there is, of course, the Ridley Discord server, which you can find on smashchords.com. Thanks for sticking around for as long as you have. Like I said earlier, I'll also be posting up a video on some of Ridley's available movement options that I've learned and integrated in the few months I've been maining him. If you'd like to see more content like that, and for more content on Atlantic Canada's Super Smash Bros. And their local scenes, be sure to subscribe to this channel. Be sure to also check out my character guide on Piranha Plant, and my video discussing on how to more effectively play in a tournament setting. If you'd like a refresher on Ridley, you can find a link to my older video in this end slate as well. I'll see you next time.